Good afternoon, and thank you everybody for joining me today for this month's webinar on using SQL tables to streamline your processes. My name is Laura Froyum, and I'm the sales director here at CDI. So just a couple of housekeeping items to start. Today's webinar will be recorded and available for viewing on our client portal and our YouTube channel following today's session. And if you've got any questions throughout the webinar, please don't hesitate to type them into the chat box on your GoToMeeting screen. After the presentation is completed, I'll be able to go through your questions and address them at this time, or at that time. All right, so today we are going to take a look at what a SQL table is. We're going to talk about what they can be used for, and then how Laserfiche can interact with them. And then we'll go through a live presentation of using that functionality in action. I won't actually be going through how to create your own SQL table, but if you do log into our session next month, which I'll advertise a little bit later on, you'll be able to learn how to do that, as well as our recording for setting up dynamic templates that was recorded earlier this month. You can get access on how to build those without those build along sessions. So what is a database table? So really every application that you use consists of a series of database tables. And these tables are just a set of data elements or values that help us with the information that we need to collect for the system. The database tables are what makes your system run behind the scenes, so they can seem unapproachable, but they definitely can be very approachable. So what I kind of like to think of SQL tables that we interact with as more like an Excel document. I mean, most people are pretty familiar with Excel and how to use Excel. SQL tables can be the same, but you can leverage them in a much more extensive way with Laserfiche than you can in Excel document. So why do tables help? Well, tables allow us to collect, retrieve, and update information. So, again, using an Excel document as an example, I imagine some of you are leveraging Excel right now for collecting information. What kind of information are you collecting? And if you wouldn't mind sharing that, you could type that into the questions and I can kind of give some examples throughout the presentation that people are using their Excel documents for and relate that to using a table in Laserfiche. But with that, when we are leveraging a SQL table, you can do things like scheduling classes. You can create a class schedule within SQL, and then you can use a form and make that publicly accessible for people to online and sign up for classes. It's really great for, community programs or community education, or parks and recreation can use it for scheduling, the rental of parks, things like that. We use SQL tables internally for a lot of stuff here at Cities Digital. We use it for all of our HR processes, from building our job descriptions and to, our review process to, just information that we're collecting from each of our clients. So we leverage SQL tables as part of our Laserfiche processes pretty heavily here. So some of the ways that you can interact with SQL with Laserfiche is through forms. So that's what we're going to take a look at today. But again, you can use information that's collected in a Laserfiche form. Again, it's just an online form. Any of the information collected in that can be pushed into a SQL table to create that database of information. Not only can you use it with forms, but you can also use it with workflow. So if your system doesn't have forms, or you're not currently using forms, but you do collect information or update metadata as part of a workflow process, you can definitely leverage the information that's being collected as part of that process to push into SQL with Laserfiche. So you have all kinds of options to build workflow activities, to update and push information to those SQL tables for you behind the scenes. Another way that Laserfiche interacts with SQL data is for creating dynamic fields. So again, we had recorded that build along webinar earlier this month for creating your own dynamic templates within Laserfiche. And just kind of another example of that for attendees who maybe weren't able to join that session. Now, if you want to create a dynamic field, that means, based on the selections you populate in your template, another field dynamically changes. So you can see here, I've got a little outline. I've got 3 options for communication: benefits information, COBRA information, correspondence. Those all go in the communications folder. Job role information. Within that folder, you can see their job description, promotion information, tuition reimbursements, new hire files, and so on. So that's how you create and can leverage SQL for dynamic templates, so that it's dynamic based on really what you need, which helps route it to the appropriate folder as you're building your system. So some of the other use cases, I just slapped a couple in here, but definitely there are more use cases beyond this, of course. And again, if your team is using SQL for any use case internally at your organization, please share it. And, I'll talk about it again during the question session. But HR, so again, anything having to do with job role information, IT operations, tracking software installations, license keys, we keep all of that information in a SQL table. And then we can reference it and we can see who has what at any time, and we can query it and we can pull it up through Laserfiche if we need to. Maybe your legal department is using dynamic templates for your contract information. So based on the vendor type or client type or organization type, you've got a dynamic template that gives you drop downs for within your legal department. Again, marketing or organizing events, you've got that event registration. So if you've got your website and you want citizens to go onto your website and sign up for community ed courses, you can leverage and track all of those registration details within a SQL table. So as you've got registrants signing up for classes, the SQL table can track how many people and how many open spaces you have available. And as you collect registrants, once it gets full, it will start rejecting people because you've got that all configured into your SQL table and your process. So again, tons of areas for use cases with SQL tables in Laserfiche. So Laserfiche really allows us to tie into other databases with SQL. So again, Laserfiche is SQL based, so we can use any of those SQL tables in our forms or workflow processes, but we can also tie into the database tables in some of your other applications too, to help pre-fill form information or populate metadata as part of your process. So some examples of that is if you've got finance software like PeopleSoft or QuickBooks, your CRMs, the Tamaracks, the Redtails, all of those. Your GIS system, if you want to grab parcel information and address information, we can tie into those other databases to help you pre-populate information so that you don't have to key all of that in. So from there, let's take a look at a demo. So I'm trying to keep today's session, pretty simple, but this demo I think is really exciting. So let me jump over. So what we're going to take a look at today, and this is kind of the meat of today's session, is going into those SQL tables, seeing how they can be updated with our processes within Laserfiche. So if we want to get to a SQL table, you do have to have access to the SQL server manager. You need to have access to the server that is housing your Laserfiche system. So likely you would need to have administrator access, or you would need to work with one of your IT admins to get access to these things so you can interact with the tables if you wanted. Otherwise, again, as part of building out a Laserfiche process, once these tables are set up, you don't ever need to go back into them, because then we can leverage the user interface of Laserfiche to update the data for us. So I'm just going to go ahead and connect in, get on my server, and just show you what it looks like. So here I'm logged in. Again, if I take a look at my databases, I can see here I've got all my databases for my Laserfiche installation. So all of my programs, all of my repositories, any of the modules that I've got installed here on my demo machine are here. These database tables are not tables that you're going to be interacting with. These are the tables that are running your applications. But where we're going to go in is to our external tables. And this is where we would be creating new tables that we would use. And so here I can see I've got a few tables already pre-created. All of mine do have some information already in them. And so let's say I want to go in here and take a look at my departmental management. You can go ahead and just select it. And I'm just going to say edit the top 200 rows. And that's going to pull up my table data for me. And so as we look at it, and once it loads here, we'll see, it's a really small Excel, which makes it very approachable, but also not something, very approachable, but also very powerful. So we can see I've only got 4 departments in here. Maybe I want to look at my departmental positions. Again, just right click on it. So what I want to show is that we are going to go ahead and use the Laserfiche interface to update and add a new position. So what I'm going to do is just take a screenshot of this so we can go ahead and compare it. We'll move that over. And now I'm going to open up Laserfiche. So we are going to be leveraging the functionality of forms to make updates. And this is a pre-configured solution. So if this is something your team is interested in, just let me know and we can help you get it implemented within your organization. So what I'm looking at here is just a couple of different Laserfiche forms. We have been configuring forms and using them as dashboards internally. So all of the information and frequently used forms that we have are all centralized in one location. So if I go into my create and manage my Laserfiche configuration, this form is what I'm going to use to update my database. So I want to go ahead and update departments and positions. So I'm just going to click on that tab. I'm going to add a new departmental position. And so we can see here, this is pulling back all of the current departmental positions that we have. So if I pull over my screenshot, here we go. We've got a sales director, account manager, president, all of them listed in order in alignment with our SQL table. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a position. So I'm just going to click add. I'm going to say I want to create a new position for the sales team. And it's going to be an administrator. So from here, all I do is click update. And what this is going to do is start the shell of everything I need for this departmental role. And what that means is, oh, okay, I've got a new sales administrator. Now we need to figure out what the job description is going to be for that administrator. And then we need a way to tie that back into our review process and a way to track it into our templates and all of that. And so if you tie that into a SQL table or a series of SQL tables, you can tie all of that in together really easily. So my information's being updated. That's fantastic. I'm going to just pop over to this SQL table. I'm going to X out of it, and then we're going to refresh it. And here we go. We've got our new sales administrator position pending. And we can see here that it's pending a description. So I got to get a description added in here. So instead of going into the SQL table to make the edit, I'm just going to go back to my Laserfiche form. And coming back to the SQL table again, it's not something that you would need to do. I just am trying to show that we can use the forms interface to update that information so you don't have to have interaction with the table. So I'm just going to click here to continue. It's going to bring me back to my departmental management position portion. And so now, instead of managing the departmental position, I want to manage the position description. So I've got a new department role for sales, an administrator, and I want to update the purpose and objective for this role, the requirements, and the goals. So then I can use this information again to create a job description really easily. And so I've got a standard job description for every time I onboard a new sales administrator. So I'm not recreating the wheel. I'm not going in to copy and paste somebody's old one. I'm getting a fresh one each time. So be the greatest. We're going to go ahead and add some actions that they need to do. So it is a requirement for this administrator to call the clients. And then their goal is to call the clients quarterly. So I'm going to go ahead and update my system. And this is going to, in turn, go and update all of my my back-end tables and all of that so that I can start generating documents. And so now if I pop over to my Laserfiche system, I can see in here, if I go into my human resources, if I had an employee listed under sales for that job role, you know, I would be able to see them here. But if I go ahead, and we're going to hire somebody. And then that, again, is going to pull information from these database tables, these database tables to generate a job offer letter for me. So if I jump back into forms, I'm going to go to my job applicant review form. And again, all of these forms and workflows and these processes are already pre-configured. And if you're interested in them or some version of them into your system, just let me know. So I can review a specific applicant. So if I want to look at the sales team, I can see who has applied for the account manager position, and I can selectively choose them and view their application. Or I can view all the applicants at once. And so in this form, again, this is all tied to SQL tables, and I am just interfacing with this Laserfiche form. I'm going to go ahead and offer the job to Josh Dumel. We're going to onboard him as one of our account managers. I think that would be really great. So I'm just going to create the offer and submit it. And then when I pull up his folder in Laserfiche, in our job requisitions, I can see here in Josh's folder, created today at 1:18 p.m. Central, his offer letter was generated. And so if we go ahead and we open it, I can see that this was pre-configured. Now I don't have a full license of Word installed on my machine, so this does unfortunately not look very fancy, but this Word document, again, can be configured really in any way that you want, but we can see here that it pulled the account manager title out of the database and who he would be reporting to. And again, all of this information is collected in the database and then populated this fillable document for us that we could then send out via DocuSign or print and mail or email, you know, however you distribute this to your applicant. And again, all I did was update a couple form fields, and then from there, all of my information was accessible in a database for me to pull from. So another neat thing that I want to show is, you know, we created that that new job role. So if we had an employee that we needed to review, we could go ahead and review that employee. And that job role information would be tied and available in this review process. So I have to look at an already hired employee. So take a look at myself. If there were any issues, again, you could have an internal form available for managers to submit, logs of citations that were maybe issued. We internally use what we call a Yelp form for positive messages on clients that show up as part of our review process. And then if we take a look at the requirements and goals, again, this makes the review process really easy because the employee knows what's expected of them, it's all documented, and then all of this gets pushed into a database that is easily referenceable later. So again, all of my requirements for the sales director job duties were already input in here. I can go through and grade it or give it, a value of whatever I want, 1 through 5. I think I'm pretty great. I'm going to give it a 5 across the board. Let's fix that 2. Nobody wants a 2. And again, as part of this review process and a form, as you may or may not know, you can make some fields required. And I'm just going to go through and I'm going to submit this. And as part of this process too, if I had already received a review, I would be able to see my previous year's grading and my previous year's manager's notes as a supervisor, so that it makes it really easy to talk about, well, here's what we talked about last year. Here's where you were at last year, and here's where you're at this year. And again, if all of that is tracked in a database, it makes it super simple to have that easily accessible to you really at any time. So I can just go through and submit it. It queries a grade point average, and then I can go ahead and just submit it from there. Oops. But I do have to fill it all out. Again, 5s. If you were doing this live in your environment, I would recommend making all of these fields required. In my demo environment next time, I will change that. So my growth plan from earlier in the year was training. So when I had gone through and had a review earlier in the year, my growth plan was to have more training. So if I add another goal today, so today I want to visit Empower in February. Next. And we can go ahead and submit this, and then from there it goes kind of through an approval process. But if I go in now and I want to resubmit a review, so another couple months down the road or next year down the road, if I do another employee review, I'm going to go ahead and select Laura again. If I had any issues, that would pull up here. If I look at my feedback and growth, oops, my form hasn't refreshed yet. My updated growth plan would show up here. And again, all of that is just collected and pushed into a SQL table from interfacing with forms. All right, so really that's all I had on the docket today, was just taking a look at how you can interface with those SQL tables to collect information that you can then use at your fingertips as part of a process later on. So I'm going to open it up for any questions. If anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Additionally, if you've got any ideas or thoughts on what you could be using a SQL table for, please pass it through. Can you show the workflow? Joe, I got a question here. Can you show the workflow of how it updates SQL? Yeah, let's pull up that workflow. I'm going to go into my workflow designer. Unfortunately, it was not preloaded, so it'll just take a second to log in, but then we can kind of take a look at the workflow. So it is a series of workflows for each of the different forms processes. So we'll check that out. We can also go into the Forms Designer area. Yep, that's why my new job role didn't show up. All right, so let's take a look at the applicant review, monitor. I don't actually want monitor. You may or may not have noticed that this is the older version of Forms. So, all right, so let's take a look at that job applicant review process. So it's just the form submitted, and then from there, that's going to kick off the workflow. Where I'm workflow designer is still trying to open. Does anybody have any other questions while we wait for workflow to load? And also, if this doesn't load, this is something that I could potentially send screenshots on, or we could set up another call after today's webinar to go through it. Is anybody leveraging any dynamic templates currently? Any ideas of how you could leverage a dynamic template now that you've seen it and maybe have a better understanding of how you could open it? All right, we've got an example here. So we've got a user that uses it to find a list of all management levels. So definitely really great. This is really good if you're working for a larger organization and you not only have management levels, but also, pay grades and things like that. All of that can be tracked in a SQL table. And then based on, an employee's job role, they get put into a specific grade, which qualifies them for a specific amount of money, and all of that can be tracked really easily within a SQL table so that, you're not overpaying somebody for a job role, within their grade, something like that. Managers, VPs then fill emails in and usernames and use this for assigning tasks. So you could definitely do task assignment and track all of that history in a SQL table, and then, whatever you need from there, you could run reports and export that information out for sure. All right, for some reason, my workflow is just failing to open, but this is something that I will reach out after this, after the webinar, and we can definitely look into. So if I just jump back in here, so I do kind of want to mention a couple of upcoming webinars. So if you want to learn a little bit more on how you can start a SQL table and build the workflow interacting with your SQL table, the consulting webinar Build Along that we have on October 10th will be a really great resource for you. Again, all of our webinars are recorded and available afterwards on our client portal or on our YouTube channel. But this could be a really good one for you to watch. And then later on in the month, next month, we're going to do spooktacular resources. And then we're just going to kind of walk through all of the different Laserfiche tools and resources that are available for you to kind of help yourself and learn more about the system. And then from here, if there are any other questions, definitely type them into the chat. But otherwise, I appreciate everybody's time today. I know this webinar was a little short for my typical webinars, but I just wanted to give you a real topical overview on how you can interact and interface with those SQL tables to generate and populate the information you need to generate and populate the forms information that you can use, in other aspects and facets of your duties. Here is a good contact email Otherwise, I do have every registrant's contact details so I can reach out directly from here. But otherwise, again, my name is Laura Froyum. I'm the sales director. My email is just Laura, Laura, at citiesdigital.com. And then, again, we always appreciate your feedback. And if there are other webinar topics or areas of interest that you'd like to see featured as part of our webinar series, please take a moment after the webinar to fill out the brief survey and submit your feedback. Otherwise, again, I appreciate everybody's time today, and I hope you enjoy your Thursday. Thanks.